On an unbearably hot afternoon, the square, covered in fencing and smoke from boiling tar, became a silent stage. A confused German shepherd walked on the still soft asphalt and sank its paws into the black pit. Trying to back away, it slipped and began to drown in the tar, with no help in sight. The dog's owner screamed as residents watched, unable to intervene. Suddenly, a baby escaped from the stroller, crawled through a gap in the fence, and stopped just inches from the center. With arms raised, the baby babbled nonsense toward the semi-submerged animal. What happened next? No one could explain. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and never miss one. Thanks for being with us. Now, back to our story. The summer of 2024 in Millbrook, Texas, was unlike anything the town had ever experienced. The thermometer had been stuck above 100 degrees for 3 weeks straight, and the asphalt on Main Street was so hot it could fry an egg. The small town, with its population of just over 8,000, was struggling under the weight of both the oppressive heat and an ambitious downtown revitalization project that had turned the historic district into a maze of construction barriers, orange cones, and the constant smell of hot tar. Margaret Maggie Thompson had lived in Millbrook for 73 years, and she had never seen the town in such disarray. Every morning she would wake up before dawn to prepare fresh bread for the weekend farmers' market, a tradition she had maintained for over 2 decades. Her faithful companion during these early morning routines was Duke, a magnificent German shepherd who had been by her side for the past 5 years. Duke wasn't just any dog. He had an almost supernatural awareness of his surroundings and an unwavering loyalty to Maggie that had become legendary among the townspeople. He would sit patiently by the front gate every morning, watching over Maggie's small white house on Elm Street while she worked in the kitchen. His disciplined nature and protective instincts had earned him the nickname the Guardian among the neighbors. On this particular Thursday morning, the construction noise was more intense than usual. The city had hired Morrison Construction Company to completely renovate Centennial Square, the heart of the downtown area. The square had been the pride of Millbrook since 1876, featuring a beautiful Victorian gazebo surrounded by old oak trees and stone benches where generations of families had gathered for community events. Now, the square was unrecognizable. Heavy machinery roared from dawn to dusk, and workers in hard hats moved around like ants, laying new foundations and pouring hot asphalt in sections. The noise was constant and overwhelming, especially for sensitive ears like Duke's. Jake Morrison, the project foreman and son of the construction company's owner, was feeling the pressure to complete the project before the town's sesquicentennial celebration in August. The heat was making everything more difficult, and his crew was constantly battling fatigue and dehydration. The asphalt had to be poured at exactly the right temperature, and with the ambient heat so high, the window for perfect application was becoming narrower each day. "Keep that barrier secure around Section C," Jake called out to his crew that morning, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove. "The asphalt's still soft, and we can't have anyone wandering into the work zone." The barriers around the construction site were supposed to be foolproof, but the extreme heat was warping some of the plastic fencing, creating small gaps that would be invisible to most people, but potentially dangerous for curious animals or small children. 3 blocks away, Emma Rodriguez was preparing for another challenging day as a single mother in a town where every routine had been disrupted by construction. At 26, Emma had already faced more obstacles than most people twice her age. She had moved to Millbrook 2 years ago with her infant son, Gabriel, hoping to start fresh after a difficult period in her life. She worked as a part-time nurse at the local clinic and sold handmade crafts at the weekend market to make ends meet. Gabriel, now 2 years old, was an unusually perceptive child. Emma often marveled at how he seemed to understand things that were beyond his age and vocabulary. He had a way of looking at people as if he could see something they couldn't see themselves. His pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Collins, had mentioned that some children develop heightened sensitivities to their environment, especially those who experience significant changes early in life. Emma had planned to take Gabriel to the market that morning to help Maggie set up her bread stand, something that had become a weekly tradition for them. Gabriel loved seeing Duke, and the feeling seemed mutual. There was something magical about the connection between the toddler and the German Shepherd that Emma couldn't quite explain. As Emma loaded Gabriel into his stroller, she noticed the increased construction noise coming from the direction of the square. The sound of jackhammers and heavy machinery had become the soundtrack of their summer, and she worried about how it was affecting not just Gabriel, but all the children in the neighborhood. "Looks like it's going to be another noisy day, sweetheart," she said to Gabriel, who was already alert, and looking in the direction of the construction sounds. For a moment, she considered staying home, but Maggie depended on their help, and Emma needed the small income from her craft sales. Meanwhile, Duke was showing signs of unusual restlessness. Maggie noticed that he was pacing more than usual and seemed unable to settle in his favorite spot by the front gate. The constant noise of the construction equipment was clearly affecting him. But there was something else, something that Maggie couldn't identify but could sense in the way he kept looking toward the square. "What is it, boy?" Maggie asked, running her weathered hand through Duke's thick coat. "I know the noise is bothering you, but we'll get through this together just like we always do." But Duke's behavior was different that morning. His ears were constantly perked, rotating like radar dishes, and he kept making low, whining sounds that Maggie had never heard before. It was as if he was trying to tell her something important, something that went beyond mere discomfort with the construction noise. The heat was already becoming unbearable by 9 in the morning, and the weather service had issued another excessive heat warning for the entire county. The combination of high temperature and humidity created a dangerous situation for anyone spending extended time outdoors, particularly the elderly and very young. As Maggie finished loading her bread into the delivery boxes, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving to the market as she usually did, she decided to walk the 6 blocks to give Duke some exercise and fresh air, hoping it might help calm his restless energy. It was a decision driven by love and concern for her faithful companion, but one that would set in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted. Duke's restlessness seemed to intensify as they approached the square. The closer they got to the construction zone, the more agitated he became. Maggie began to worry that something might be seriously wrong with him, perhaps a reaction to the heat or the stress of the ongoing construction. What neither Maggie nor Emma realized as they prepared for their day was that the forces of fate were already in motion, drawing them toward an encounter that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the bonds between humans and animals, and about the mysterious ways that life sometimes presents us with moments that can only be described as miraculous. The morning sun was climbing higher in the cloudless Texas sky when Maggie and Duke reached the edge of Centennial Square. The construction zone looked like a battlefield, with heavy machinery scattered across what used to be a peaceful gathering place for the community. Orange barriers surrounded most of the area, but the extreme heat had already begun to warp some of the plastic fencing, creating gaps that Jake Morrison's crew hadn't yet noticed. Duke's agitation had been growing with each step closer to the square. His usual calm, disciplined demeanor was replaced by something Maggie had never seen before. A deep, almost primal anxiety that seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond his understanding. He kept pulling toward the construction site, his powerful body straining against the leash as if drawn by an invisible force. "Easy, Duke," Maggie whispered, trying to soothe him while struggling to maintain her grip on the leash. At 73, her arthritis made it difficult to control a 90-pound German shepherd when he was determined to go somewhere. "We need to get to the market. People are waiting for their bread." But Duke wasn't listening. His ears were rotating, constantly, picking up sounds and frequencies that human ears couldn't detect. The combination of construction noise, the heat radiating from the fresh asphalt, and something else, something that called to him on a level he couldn't comprehend, was creating a perfect storm of instinct and urgency. At that moment, a particularly loud jackhammer started up near the gazebo, sending vibrations through the ground that Duke could feel in his bones. The sudden noise, combined with the accumulated stress of the morning, triggered something deep in his protective instincts. Without warning, he lunged forward with such force that the leash slipped from Maggie's arthritic fingers. "Duke!" Maggie called out in alarm, but her voice was swallowed by the construction noise. The German shepherd was already racing toward a gap in the barrier that had been created when the heat warped a section of plastic fencing near the old gazebo. Duke squeezed through the opening and found himself in the heart of the construction zone. The workers were focused on their tasks at the far end of the square, laying pipes for a new irrigation system. They hadn't noticed the breach in their security perimeter, and they certainly hadn't seen a large dog enter the danger zone. The area around the Victorian gazebo was the most treacherous part of the entire project. Jake Morrison's crew had spent the previous day pouring hot asphalt to level the ground around the historic structure, which was being carefully preserved as the centerpiece of the renovated square. The asphalt was still soft and dangerously hot, radiating heat like a black ocean of molten tar. Duke approached the area cautiously, his natural intelligence warning him that something wasn't right. But the force that had drawn him here was stronger than his survival instincts. He could sense something, a presence, a need, a call for help that existed beyond the physical world, but felt as real as the burning sun above him. As he stepped onto what looked like solid ground near the gazebo, Duke's front paws immediately sank into the soft, hot asphalt. The material was still malleable from the intense heat, and his weight caused him to sink deeper with each movement. Panic set in as he tried to back away, but his hind legs also became trapped as he lost his balance and stumbled forward. Within moments, Duke found himself chest-deep in the hot asphalt, struggling against the viscous material that seemed to pull him deeper with every movement. The heat was intense, but not immediately life-threatening, thanks to his thick coat providing some protection. However, the psychological trauma of being trapped was overwhelming, and his struggles were only making the situation worse. From outside the barrier, Maggie's desperate calls for help were finally being heard. Several townspeople had gathered, including Tom Bradley, the owner of the local hardware store, and Dr. Collins, who happened to be walking by on her way to the clinic. "Someone needs to call 911, Dr. Collins shouted, already pulling out her phone. "And we need to get those construction workers over here now." Jake Morrison came running when he heard the commotion, his face turning pale when he saw Duke trapped in the asphalt. "How did he get in there?" he asked, but quickly realized that assigning blame wasn't going to solve the immediate crisis. "We need to be very careful. That asphalt is still hot enough to cause serious burns." The construction crew gathered around the barrier, but the heat radiating from the asphalt made it impossible to approach Duke directly. Every attempt to get close enough to help resulted in the workers' boots sticking to the hot surface, creating additional safety hazards. "We could try using planks to distribute the weight," suggested Mike Chen, one of Jake's most experienced workers. "But we'd need to move fast. The longer he stays in there, the more exhausted he's going to get." Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Emma was finally ready to leave for the market with Gabriel. The toddler had been unusually quiet during their morning routine, spending most of his time staring out the window in the direction of the square. Emma had attributed his behavior to the heat and the constant construction noise, but as she loaded him into his stroller, Gabriel suddenly became animated. "Dog," he said clearly, pointing toward the square. It was one of his favorite words, and Emma assumed he was excited about seeing Duke at the market. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to see Duke and Miss Maggie," Emma replied, beginning to push the stroller down the sidewalk. But Gabriel's behavior was different from his usual excitement about seeing the German Shepherd. He kept pointing toward the square and repeating "dog" with increasing urgency. As they approached the corner of Oak and Main Streets, Emma could see a crowd gathering near the construction zone. Her nursing instincts immediately kicked in, and she wondered if someone had been hurt. The sight of Dr. Collins's car parked nearby confirmed her suspicions that this wasn't just a typical construction delay. "Help! Dog!" Gabriel suddenly called out, his vocabulary expanding in the moment of crisis in a way that stunned Emma. He was standing up in his stroller, straining against the safety straps and pointing directly toward the crowd. Emma's heart began to race as she realized what Gabriel was trying to tell her. Something had happened to Duke. She quickened her pace, pushing the stroller faster toward the scene while trying to keep Gabriel calm. But the toddler's agitation was growing by the second, and he was making sounds that Emma had never heard before, not quite crying, not quite calling, but something that seemed to come from a deeper, more primal place. Back at the construction site, Duke's situation was becoming more critical by the minute. The German Shepherd's struggles were weakening, and the heat was beginning to take its toll despite his thick coat. The construction workers had managed to position several wooden planks near the edge of the asphalt, but the logistics of reaching Duke without putting additional people at risk were proving nearly impossible. Maggie stood at the barrier, her hands gripping the plastic fencing so tightly that her knuckles were white. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she watched her beloved companion trapped and struggling. "Please," she whispered to anyone who would listen, "someone has to help him. He's all I have left." Dr. Collins had called for emergency services, but the volunteer fire department was already dealing with 2 heat-related emergencies across town, and their specialized equipment was tied up with those calls. Time was running out, and conventional rescue methods weren't working. It was at this moment of seeming hopelessness that Emma arrived with Gabriel, pushing through the crowd of onlookers to get a better view of the situation. When she saw Duke trapped in the asphalt, her nursing training immediately kicked in, and she began to assess the situation with a professional eye. But it was Gabriel's reaction that caught everyone's attention. The moment he saw Duke, the toddler let out a sound that silenced the entire crowd. Not a cry or a scream, but something that sounded almost like a song, a melody that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his 2-year-old understanding of the world. The sound that came from Gabriel was unlike anything Emma had ever heard from her son. It wasn't a typical toddler's babbling or crying, but something that seemed to carry a deeper meaning, a communication that transcended language. The crowd around the construction barrier fell silent, turning to look at the small boy who was straining against his stroller straps with an urgency that was both beautiful and haunting. "Dog! Help! Dog!" Gabriel called out, his small hands reaching toward Duke with a desperation that broke Emma's heart. She had never seen her son so agitated, so focused on something beyond his immediate world. The connection between Gabriel and Duke had always been special, but this was something entirely different. Emma quickly unbuckled Gabriel from his stroller and lifted him into her arms, intending to comfort him while staying safely outside the construction zone. But Gabriel had other plans. With the determination that only a 2-year-old can muster, he began to squirm and fight against his mother's embrace, his eyes never leaving Duke's struggling form. "Mama, go! Go help!" Gabriel said, using more complex words than Emma had ever heard from him. The crisis seemed to be unlocking something in his developing mind, allowing him to express thoughts and feelings that went far beyond his usual vocabulary. Doctor Collins approached Emma, recognizing the distress that both mother and child were experiencing. Emma, maybe it would be better to take Gabriel away from here. This isn't something a child should have to witness. But Gabriel wasn't going to be deterred. As the adults discussed what to do next, the toddler did something that no one anticipated. With the agility and determination that only small children possess, he slipped out of Emma's arms and darted toward a section of the barrier where the heat had created a larger gap in the plastic fencing. "Gabriel!" Emma screamed, lunging after her son, but he was already through the opening and inside the construction zone before anyone could stop him. The crowd gasped in collective horror as they watched the small figure moving across the dangerous terrain toward the trapped German Shepherd. Jake Morrison immediately sprang into action, grabbing a pair of work gloves and preparing to enter the zone himself to retrieve Gabriel. "Stay back, everyone. I'm going in after the kid." But something remarkable was happening. Gabriel, despite being only 2 years old, seemed to navigate the treacherous construction zone with an almost supernatural awareness of the dangers around him. He avoided loose equipment, stepped around soft spots in the ground, and moved with a purpose that defied his age and experience. The heat inside the construction zone was overwhelming, easily exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with the combination of the sun beating down on the black asphalt and the radiant heat from the construction materials. For an adult, prolonged exposure to such conditions would be dangerous. For a small child, it should have been impossible to tolerate. Yet Gabriel continued moving forward, his small legs carrying him steadily toward Duke. His face showed no signs of distress from the heat, and his breathing remained steady and controlled. It was as if he existed in a protective bubble that shielded him from the harsh environment that was overwhelming everyone else. Duke, who had been growing weaker by the minute, suddenly raised his head when he sensed Gabriel's approach. The German Shepherd's eyes, which had been glazed with exhaustion and pain, suddenly became alert and focused. A low whine escaped from his throat, but it wasn't a sound of distress. It was recognition, communication, a greeting between two souls who understood each other on a level that transcended species. As Gabriel reached the edge of the asphalt where Duke was trapped, the toddler stopped and sat down cross-legged, positioning himself just inches from Duke's nose. The crowd, watching from behind the barriers, held their collective breath, certain they were about to witness something terrible. Instead, Gabriel began to speak to Duke in the soft, melodic tones that had silenced the crowd earlier. The words weren't in any recognizable language. They were the universal sounds of comfort and connection that exist before formal language develops. But there was a rhythm to Gabriel's vocalizations, a pattern that seemed almost like a song or chant. "Shh, shh, good dog," Gabriel said, reaching out with his tiny hand to gently touch Duke's nose. "No, scared, Gabriel here, good dog, safe now." The effect on Duke was immediate and extraordinary. The German Shepherd, who had been struggling weakly against the asphalt just moments before, suddenly seemed to find renewed strength. His eyes brightened, and he began to shift his weight in a more coordinated way, as if Gabriel's presence had somehow restored his will to fight. Emma was beside herself with fear and awe, watching her son communicate with the trapped animal in a way that seemed to transcend normal human-animal interaction. "Gabriel, baby, please be careful," she called out, but her voice was barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Jake Morrison had gathered his equipment and was preparing to enter the construction zone to rescue both Gabriel and Duke, but something in the scene before him made him pause. There was a quality to the interaction between the child and the dog that suggested interrupting might do more harm than good. "Look at the dog," Dr. Collins said quietly, her medical training helping her observe details that others might miss. "His breathing has stabilized and he's moving more purposefully. It's like the child's presence is having a therapeutic effect." Gabriel continued his gentle communication with Duke, occasionally reaching out to stroke the dog's nose or ears, with the fearless affection that only children can show. There was no hesitation in his movements, no fear of the trapped animal who could easily have injured him if panic had set in. "Duke, good dog," Gabriel said clearly, his vocabulary continuing to expand in real time. Gabriel helped Duke. "No stuck. Come out." And then something happened that would be talked about in Millbrook for years to come. Gabriel stood up and began to walk around the perimeter of the asphalt where Duke was trapped, his small voice raised in what could only be described as a song. The melody was simple but haunting, with a rhythm that seemed to match the cadence of a heartbeat. As Gabriel sang, Duke began to respond with increasing strength and coordination. The German Shepherd's movements became more purposeful, less panicked. It was as if the child's song was providing him with the focus and determination he needed to escape from his predicament. The crowd watched in amazement as Duke, with what seemed like superhuman effort, began to work his way out of the asphalt. His movements were slow and deliberate, but they were effective. Each time he seemed to lose momentum, Gabriel would move closer and continue his gentle song, and Duke would find the strength to continue. Jake Morrison was recording the entire scene on his phone, knowing that no one would believe what they were witnessing without video evidence. The construction crew had stopped their work entirely, drawn by the extraordinary drama unfolding in their midst. "In 25 years of construction work, I've never seen anything like this," Mike Chen whispered to his co-worker. "It's like that kid has some kind of magical connection with the dog." Maggie, still gripping the barrier with white knuckles, was torn between terror for both Duke and Gabriel and wonder at the miracle she was witnessing. "That child," she said to Emma, "there's something special about your boy. Something really special." Emma could only nod, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son demonstrate a capacity for compassion and connection that she had never fully recognized before. Gabriel had always been an unusual child, more perceptive and sensitive than his peers, but this was something extraordinary. As Duke continued his slow but steady progress toward freedom, Gabriel's song grew stronger and more confident. The toddler seemed to understand instinctively that his role was to provide the emotional and spiritual support that the German Shepherd needed to overcome his physical predicament. The heat was still overwhelming, and both Gabriel and Duke should have been showing signs of severe distress by now. Instead, they both seemed to exist in their own protected space, sustained by a connection that defied logical explanation, but was undeniably real to everyone watching. The moment that would forever change the residents of Millbrook came when Gabriel's song reached a crescendo that seemed to resonate through the very air around them. Duke, responding to something beyond physical strength, made one final coordinated effort to pull himself free from the asphalt that had held him captive. With a sound like a cork being pulled from a bottle, Duke's front paws broke free from the viscous material. The German Shepherd, driven by determination and the inexplicable energy that Gabriel's presence provided, managed to use the wooden planks that the construction crew had positioned earlier as leverage points to pull his entire body out of the trap. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as Duke, covered in black asphalt but very much alive, stumbled toward Gabriel. The dog's tail was wagging weakly, and his eyes were bright with gratitude and exhaustion. Gabriel, still sitting cross-legged where he had positioned himself, opened his small arms wide to welcome his friend. "Duke, good dog, free!" Gabriel exclaimed, his face glowing with joy and accomplishment. The toddler showed no fear as the large, asphalt-covered German Shepherd approached him, only pure love and celebration. Jake Morrison was the first to spring into action, grabbing bottles of water and moving quickly but carefully into the construction zone. "We need to cool them both down immediately," he called out to his crew. "And someone needs to call Dr. Martinez, the veterinarian. Duke's going to need medical attention." Emma, finally able to move from the spot where terror had frozen her, carefully entered the construction zone to retrieve Gabriel. But as she approached her son and Duke, she was amazed to find that neither of them seemed to be suffering from heat exhaustion or dehydration, despite having spent nearly 20 minutes in conditions that should have been life-threatening. "Gabriel, baby, are you okay?" Emma asked, kneeling down to examine her son. His skin was warm but not overheated, his breathing was normal, and his eyes were bright and alert. It was as if he had been protected by some invisible shield during his time in the danger zone. Dr. Collins, using her medical training, immediately began to assess both Gabriel and Duke. "This is remarkable," she said, checking Gabriel's pulse and observing his overall condition. "By all medical logic, this child should be showing signs of severe heat stress, but his vital signs are completely normal." Duke, meanwhile, was allowing Jake Morrison and Mike Chen to gently wash the asphalt from his coat with cool water. The German Shepherd stood patiently as they worked, but his eyes never left Gabriel, as if maintaining their connection was more important than his own comfort. "Look at this," Dr. Collins said, examining Duke more closely as the asphalt was cleaned away. "The burns should be much more severe than this. The asphalt was hot enough to cause second-degree burns, but his skin appears to have only minor irritation." Dr. Carmen Martinez, the town's veterinarian, arrived within minutes, having been called away from another appointment when she heard about the emergency. As she examined Duke, her expression grew increasingly puzzled. "I've treated animals who've been trapped in hot asphalt before," Dr. Martinez explained to the gathered crowd. "The injuries are usually severe and require extensive treatment, but Duke here—" She paused, running her hands along the dog's body where the asphalt had been. "He has minor burns and some skin irritation, but nothing like what I would expect." Gabriel, still sitting on the ground near Duke, reached out to pet the dog's newly cleaned fur. "Duke better now," he said confidently. "No hurt. Gabriel sing, Duke better." Emma was beginning to understand that something extraordinary had occurred, something that went beyond coincidence or luck. Her son had somehow connected with Duke on a level that had provided protection and healing for both of them during their ordeal. Maggie, finally able to reach Duke, fell to her knees beside her beloved companion, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Oh, Duke, my brave boy," she whispered, hugging him carefully. "I thought I was going to lose you." Duke responded by gently licking Maggie's face, but he kept looking back at Gabriel, as if acknowledging that his rescue had been a team effort. The bond that had always existed between the German Shepherd and the toddler had been transformed into something deeper, something that everyone present could sense, but no one could fully explain. Jake Morrison, still shaken by what he had witnessed, made an immediate decision. "We're shutting down this section of the project until we can install better safety barriers," he announced to his crew. "What happened here today can never happen again." But even as he spoke about improved safety measures, Jake knew that the real story wasn't about construction accidents or emergency response procedures. It was about the inexplicable connection between a 2-year-old boy and a German Shepherd that had somehow defied the laws of physics and medicine. As the crowd began to disperse and the immediate crisis was resolved, word of what had happened started to spread throughout Millbrook. Within hours, people from neighboring towns were calling to ask if the stories they were hearing could possibly be true. Emma found herself at the center of attention that she never wanted or expected. Reporters from the local newspaper wanted to interview Gabriel, and someone had already posted Jake's video on social media, where it was being shared thousands of times with captions like "Miracle in Texas" and "Toddler saves dog with song." But Emma's focus was entirely on Gabriel, who seemed completely unfazed by all the attention. As they walked home that evening, with Duke accompanying them at Maggie's insistence, Gabriel chattered happily about his adventure. "Duke, my friend," Gabriel said, reaching down to pat the German shepherd's head as they walked. "Gabriel help Duke. Duke help Gabriel. Friends forever." Dr. Collins, who had stayed to monitor both Gabriel and Duke for several hours after the rescue, was struggling to write her report of the incident. How could she document something that seemed to defy medical explanation? Gabriel showed no signs of heat-related stress. Duke's injuries were far less severe than they should have been, and both seemed to have been sustained by something beyond normal physiological processes. That evening, as the sun finally began to set over Millbrook, the temperature dropped to a more manageable 95 degrees. The construction zone was quiet, with new, more secure barriers in place, and the area where Duke had been trapped marked off for special attention. Maggie invited Emma and Gabriel to her house for dinner, wanting to properly thank the child who had saved Duke's life. As they sat on Maggie's front porch, watching Gabriel play with Duke in the small front yard, the two women tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. "I've lived in this town my whole life," Maggie said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like what happened today. Your boy has a gift, Emma, something special." Emma nodded, watching Gabriel whisper secrets to Duke, who listened with the attention of someone hearing profound wisdom. "I've always known Gabriel was different," she said, "more sensitive, more aware than other children his age. But today, he showed us that some connections go deeper than we understand," Maggie finished. "Duke has always been protective, always loyal, but the way he responded to Gabriel was something beyond normal animal behavior." As if sensing that he was being discussed, Gabriel looked up from his play with Duke and smiled at both women. "Duke happy now?" he said simply. Gabriel, "Happy too, all friends happy." The simplicity of his statement carried a wisdom that neither woman could dispute. In a world that often seemed divided and disconnected, Gabriel had demonstrated that some bonds transcend age, species, and even physical limitations. As the evening wore on and the heat finally began to break, the people of Millbrook would remember this day not as a near tragedy, but as a reminder that miracles can happen in the most unexpected ways, often through the actions of those who are too young to know that what they're doing should be impossible. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Centennial Square, and Millbrook had slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though nothing would ever be quite the same. The construction project had resumed with enhanced safety measures, and the spot where Duke had been trapped was now marked with a small commemorative plaque that Jake Morrison had installed at his own expense. The plaque bore a simple inscription, "Where courage comes in small packages and miracles happen through connection." Below it, a bronze paw print was embedded next to a small handprint, symbolizing the extraordinary bond between Gabriel and Duke that had captivated the entire community. Around the memorial, Jake had planted a small garden with heat-resistant flowers that would bloom year-round, creating a beautiful space for reflection and remembrance. The transformation of Millbrook went far beyond the physical improvements to the square. The incident had awakened something in the community's collective consciousness, a renewed sense of wonder and possibility that had been dormant for years. Local businesses reported increased cooperation. Among themselves, neighbors were checking on each other more frequently, and there was a general atmosphere of kindness and connection that visitors to the town immediately noticed. Emma had initially been overwhelmed by the attention that Gabriel's heroic act had brought to their family. Reporters from as far away as Dallas and Houston had wanted to interview the miracle toddler, and the video of Gabriel saving Duke had been viewed over 2 million times online, with comments pouring in from around the world. Animal rescue organizations had reached out, wanting to feature Gabriel as a spokesperson for human-animal connection initiatives. A children's book publisher had even contacted Emma about turning their story into an illustrated book for young readers. But Emma had carefully managed the publicity, protecting Gabriel's privacy while allowing the positive message of their story to inspire others. She had learned to say no to opportunities that seemed exploitative, while embracing those that could genuinely help animals and promote kindness. The local animal shelter had seen a dramatic increase in adoptions and volunteer applications, with many people citing Gabriel and Duke's story as their inspiration to get involved. Dr. Collins had spent considerable time researching cases of exceptional human-animal connections, trying to understand what had happened from a scientific perspective. While she couldn't explain the protective effect that seemed to have shielded both Gabriel and Duke during their ordeal, she had documented everything meticulously, hoping that future research might provide answers. "What I can say with certainty," Dr. Collins told Emma during one of Gabriel's follow-up appointments, "is that your son demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for empathy and connection. Some children are born with heightened sensitivity to the emotional states of others, including animals. Gabriel appears to have this gift in abundance." The most remarkable change, however, was in the relationship between Gabriel, Duke, and the entire Millbrook community. Duke had made a complete recovery from his ordeal, with Dr. Martinez noting that his healing process had been unusually rapid and thorough. His coat had grown back shinier than before, and his energy levels seemed higher than ever. More importantly, Duke had appointed himself as Gabriel's permanent guardian and companion, a role that he took with the utmost seriousness. Every morning, Duke would arrive at Emma's house precisely at 8 o'clock, somehow having memorized Gabriel's routine without any formal training. He would wait patiently by the front gate until Gabriel appeared, his tail wagging in a rhythm that seemed to match the boy's footsteps. Duke would walk alongside Gabriel's stroller when Emma took him to the market, the playground, or anywhere else in town, positioning himself between the child and any potential danger, whether real or imagined. The German Shepherd's protective instincts had expanded to encompass not just Maggie, but Gabriel and Emma as well. When strangers approached to ask about Gabriel's story, Duke would position himself strategically, allowing interaction, but maintaining a watchful presence that discouraged anyone with questionable intentions. It was as if he understood his role as both protector and ambassador for the miracle that had brought them together. "It's like he understands that Gabriel saved his life," Maggie observed one afternoon as they watched Gabriel and Duke playing in the town square, which had finally been completed and was more beautiful than ever. "He's devoted to that boy in a way I've never seen before." The bond between Gabriel and Duke had also unlocked something remarkable in Gabriel's development. His vocabulary had expanded dramatically since the rescue, and his ability to communicate with animals had become legendary throughout the town. Local pet owners would sometimes bring their animals to Gabriel when they were sick or distressed, and the toddler seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how to comfort them. Mrs. Patricia Williams had brought her elderly cat, Whiskers, to Gabriel when the animal had stopped eating and seemed to be declining rapidly. Gabriel had spent 10 minutes sitting quietly with the cat, stroking its fur and speaking in the gentle, melodic tones that had become his trademark. Within days, Whiskers had returned to normal, much to Dr. Martinez's amazement. Similar stories began to accumulate around town, creating a reputation that Gabriel himself seemed completely unaware of. The Morrison family's golden retriever, Bailey, had developed severe anxiety after a thunderstorm, refusing to leave the house for weeks. After one afternoon with Gabriel, during which the boy had somehow convinced the dog to venture outside by singing the same mysterious song he had used to comfort Duke, Bailey had returned to his normal, playful self. Jake Morrison had documented the interaction on video, adding to the growing collection of evidence that Gabriel possessed something truly extraordinary. Emma had initially been concerned about this development, worrying that people might exploit Gabriel's gift or put too much pressure on him, but Gabriel himself seemed to take his abilities completely in stride, treating them as natural parts of his world rather than something extraordinary. "Animals talk different than people," Gabriel explained to his mother one day with the matter-of-fact wisdom that had become his trademark. "They talk with feelings and pictures. Gabriel understands the feelings." Dr. Martinez had become fascinated by Gabriel's abilities and had started documenting his interactions with various animals. "I've been a veterinarian for 15 years, she told Emma, "and I've seen children who have natural connections with animals. But Gabriel is operating on a completely different level. It's like he can sense what animals need on an emotional and even physical level." The story of Gabriel and Duke had also brought the Millbrook community closer together. The shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary had created bonds between neighbors who had previously barely known each other. Jake Morrison had become a regular visitor to Maggie's house, helping with maintenance projects and forming an unlikely friendship with the elderly woman and her famous dog. "That day changed all of us," Jake reflected one evening as he sat on Maggie's porch with Emma, watching Gabriel and Duke play in the yard. "It made us realize that there are things in this world that can't be explained by engineering or construction manuals. Sometimes you just have to believe in something bigger." The farmers' market had become even more popular, with people coming from surrounding counties not just to buy Maggie's bread, but to catch a glimpse of Gabriel and Duke, whose story had become part of local folklore. Emma had started selling a new line of handcrafted items inspired by the theme of connection and friendship, with proceeds going toward animal rescue organizations in the region. Her booth featured hand-painted signs with messages like "Miracles come in small packages" and "Love knows no species," phrases that had emerged from Gabriel's story. Local artist Sarah Henderson had created a series of paintings depicting the rescue scene, which were now displayed in the town hall and had become a source of pride for the entire community. The paintings captured not just the dramatic moment of rescue, but the spiritual connection between Gabriel and Duke that had made the miracle possible. Visitors to Millbrook would often ask to see the paintings, and they had become an unofficial tourist attraction. Gabriel himself remained completely unspoiled by the attention. At 2.5 years old, he was more interested in playing with Duke, helping his mother at the market, and making friends with every animal he encountered than in being famous. His natural humility and innocence had only endeared him more to the community. When people would call him a hero, Gabriel would simply shake his head and point to Duke, saying, "Duke, hero too. Friends help friends." One particularly meaningful development had been the friendship that grew between Emma and Maggie. The two women, separated by nearly 50 years in age, had discovered a deep connection through their shared love for Gabriel and Duke. Maggie had become like a grandmother to Gabriel, teaching him about the history of Millbrook and sharing stories of her own life. "I never had children of my own," Maggie confided to Emma one afternoon. But watching Gabriel with Duke, seeing the pure love and connection between them, has filled a space in my heart that I didn't even know was empty. As autumn approached and the brutal Texas heat finally began to subside, the people of Millbrook prepared for their sesquicentennial celebration. The renovated Centennial Square would be the centerpiece of the festivities, and Gabriel and Duke had been chosen as honorary Grand Marshals of the celebration parade. The town council had commissioned a special float decorated with images representing the themes of friendship, courage, and community connection. Local school children had spent weeks preparing special presentations about the importance of kindness to animals. Inspired by Gabriel and Duke's story, the high school marching band had even composed a special piece called The Song of Friendship that incorporated the melodic elements that Gabriel had used during the rescue, as remembered and transcribed by several musically trained witnesses. The mayor, Robert Chen, had declared the day of the celebration as Friendship and Courage Day, establishing it as an annual tradition that would honor not just Gabriel and Duke, but all acts of compassion and bravery within the community. Plans were already underway to create an annual award recognizing individuals who demonstrated exceptional kindness toward animals. The night before the celebration, Emma tucked Gabriel into bed and asked him how he felt about being so special and famous. "Gabriel, not special," he said with characteristic simplicity. "Duke special, Mama special, Miss Maggie special, all friends special together." His response reminded Emma of the most important lesson from their extraordinary experience, that the real miracle wasn't any supernatural ability Gabriel might possess, but rather his natural capacity for love, empathy, and connection. In a world that often seemed divided and disconnected, her son had shown an entire community that the bonds between living beings could transcend species, age, and circumstance. That same evening, as Emma sat on her front porch watching Gabriel play quietly with Duke in the yard, she was approached by Dr. Collins, who had been conducting follow-up research on the incident. The doctor had spent months trying to understand the scientific aspects of what had occurred, consulting with colleagues at major universities and reviewing literature on human-animal bonding. "I wanted to share something with you," Dr. Collins said, settling into the chair beside Emma. "I've been corresponding with researchers at several institutions who study exceptional cases of human-animal connection. While we may never fully understand how Gabriel was able to protect both himself and Duke during that ordeal, what we do know is that this kind of deep, empathic connection, while rare, has been documented throughout history." She pulled out a folder filled with research papers and historical accounts. There are stories from around the world of individuals, often children, who seem to possess an extraordinary ability to communicate with and heal animals. What makes Gabriel's case unique is not just the dramatic nature of the rescue, but the lasting positive impact it has had on an entire community. Emma listened thoughtfully as Dr. Collins continued. "What I find most remarkable is how Gabriel's gift has inspired others to develop their own capacity for empathy and connection. The children in town are showing increased compassion toward animals, adults are volunteering more at the animal shelter, and there's been a measurable decrease in reported cases of animal neglect or abandonment in the county." As if sensing he was being discussed, Gabriel looked up from his play and ran over to the porch with Duke following close behind. "Mama, Dr. Sarah," he said happily, climbing into Emma's lap. "Duke says thank you for helping when he was stuck." Dr. Collins smiled, no longer surprised by Gabriel's apparent ability to understand Duke's unspoken communications. "Tell Duke he's very welcome and that he's a very brave dog. Gabriel whispered something to Duke in the soft, musical tones that had become his special language with animals. Duke responded by wagging his tail and gently licking Gabriel's hand, then approaching Dr. Collins and resting his head on her knee in a gesture of gratitude and trust. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, with temperatures in the comfortable 70s for the first time in months. As Emma prepared Gabriel for the parade, she reflected on how much their lives had changed since that scorching day when Duke had been trapped in the asphalt. Gabriel had grown not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. His experience with Duke had awakened something in him that would undoubtedly shape the rest of his life. The parade began at 10 o'clock sharp, with Gabriel and Duke riding on their specially decorated float at the front of the procession. Gabriel wore a small cowboy hat that Maggie had bought for him, while Duke sported a colorful bandana and the special collar that read, "Hero Dog of Millbrook." The crowd that lined Main Street was the largest in the town's history, with people having traveled from across Texas to witness the celebration. As their float moved slowly through the downtown area, Gabriel waved enthusiastically at the crowd, occasionally pointing out animals in the audience to Duke, who seemed to understand that this was a special day dedicated to their friendship. Children in the crowd called out Gabriel's name, and many held up handmade signs with messages like "Thank you, Gabriel and Duke," and "Heroes come in all sizes." The most moving moment came when the parade reached Centennial Square. The float stopped in front of the memorial plaque, and Gabriel was helped down to place a small bouquet of wildflowers at the spot where Duke had been trapped. The crowd fell silent as the toddler knelt beside Duke and whispered something that only the German Shepherd could hear. Duke responded by gently licking Gabriel's face, and then the two of them stood together, paw and hand touching the bronze memorial, creating a living tableau that brought tears to many eyes. Emma watched from nearby, her heart full of pride and gratitude. Maggie stood beside her, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the community's celebration of the bond between her beloved Duke and the special little boy who had saved his life. Jake Morrison, who had become like family to all of them, documented the moment with his camera, knowing that this image would become an iconic representation of their story. The celebration continued into the evening, with live music performed by local bands, food vendors offering everything from traditional Texas barbecue to Maggie's famous bread, and families gathering in the renovated square under the glow of new LED lighting that Jake had installed as part of the renovation. Children played games organized by the recreation department, while adults shared stories and strengthened the community bonds that had been deepened by Gabriel and Duke's miracle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, a special ceremony took place at the memorial site. Mayor Chen presented Gabriel with a key to the city, though the toddler was more interested in the small dog biscuit that had been attached to the ceremonial key as a treat for Duke. Dr. Martinez officially declared Duke an honorary veterinary assistant, complete with a special certificate and a tiny stethoscope that Gabriel insisted on wearing around his own neck. The crowd laughed and applauded as Gabriel attempted to use the stethoscope to listen to Duke's heartbeat, nodding seriously as if he could actually hear something meaningful. As the celebration continued into the evening, with live music, local food vendors and families gathering in the renovated square, Emma felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. The plaque, marking the spot where Duke had been trapped, caught the light from the setting sun, reminding everyone present of the miracle they had witnessed and the bonds that had been forged through crisis and compassion. The evening's final event was perhaps the most magical of all. As darkness fell and the square was illuminated by the soft glow of the new lighting system, The local children's choir, led by Gabriel's enthusiastic but off-key participation, performed a song that had been written specifically for the occasion. The melody incorporated elements of the mysterious tune that Gabriel had hummed during Duke's rescue, creating a haunting and beautiful piece that seemed to capture the essence of their extraordinary story. Gabriel, exhausted from the day's festivities, but still energetic enough to participate in the singing, stood at the front of the choir with Duke sitting patiently beside him. As the children's voices rose in harmony, something magical happened. Other dogs in the audience began to howl softly, creating a natural counterpoint to the human voices. It was as if the entire animal kingdom wanted to participate in celebrating the bond between species that Gabriel and Duke represented. Emma watched with wonder as her son conducted this impromptu symphony of human and canine voices, his small hands moving in time with the music, while Duke's gentle howls provided a bass note that seemed to anchor the entire performance. The crowd was mesmerized by the spontaneous collaboration between the children, their pets, and the honorary grand marshals, whose story had brought them all together. When the song ended, Gabriel looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening Texas sky and made a wish that he whispered only to Duke. The German shepherd's tail wagged slowly, as if he understood and approved of whatever Gabriel had requested from the universe. As families began to head home, carrying sleeping children and the memories of a perfect day, Gabriel finally succumbed to exhaustion. He fell asleep in Emma's arms as Duke curled up at their feet under one of the old oak trees that had been preserved in the square's renovation. The tree had been there for over a century, witness to countless community gatherings, celebrations, and moments of human connection. Looking around at the faces of her neighbors and friends, many of whom had become like family since that fateful day in the summer heat, Emma realized that what had happened wasn't just about Gabriel saving Duke. It was about an entire community discovering the power of connection, compassion, and believing in miracles. The incident had reminded everyone that the most important things in life couldn't be measured in degrees of heat or tons of asphalt, but in the invisible bonds that tie all living beings together. As Emma gently carried Gabriel home, with Duke walking protectively beside them and Maggie linking her arm through Emma's free arm, she knew that their story would continue to inspire and bring people together for generations to come. The memorial plaque in Centennial Square would weather many more seasons, but the love and connection it represented would remain as strong and enduring as the day it was forged in crisis and sealed in courage. Gabriel stirred slightly in his mother's arms and mumbled sleepily, "Duke, good friend forever. All friends forever." Even in sleep, his words carried the simple wisdom that had changed an entire town and reminded everyone who heard their story that miracles are always possible when hearts are open and love knows no boundaries. Dear listeners, we hope that Gabriel and Duke's extraordinary story has touched your hearts and reminded you of the incredible bonds that exist between humans and animals, and the miracles that can happen when we open ourselves to connection and compassion. Their journey of friendship and heroism shows us that sometimes the most profound acts of courage come from the smallest among us, and that love truly knows no boundaries. If this heartwarming tale has moved you, we invite you to explore our special collection of similar inspiring stories about the unbreakable bonds between people and their beloved companions. You can find our carefully curated playlist by clicking to your left, where you'll discover more incredible true stories that celebrate the power of love, friendship, and unexpected miracles. We'd love to hear how Gabriel and Duke's story has inspired you. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if it brought warmth to your heart. Every day, we bring you unique, uplifting stories that explore the beautiful complexity of life and the extraordinary connections that make us human. Don't miss our upcoming stories about more remarkable animals and the people who love them. Share your own experiences with special animal companions in the comments below. We read every single one and are always amazed by the incredible bonds our listeners share with their furry, feathered and four-legged family members. Until next time, remember that miracles happen every day, and sometimes they come in the smallest, most unexpected packages.